Yes, you read the title of the video correctly. I am breaking up with porn. And there's very specific reasons to why I phrase it like that. But I'd like to preface the video by stating that this is not at all a guide to quitting porn. It is also not a deep dive into the psychology, the philosophy, or the religious nature of porn. Why do I say this? Because for a long time, I spent a lot of time watching the no-fap videos, watching all these YouTubers that would tell me about the benefits of quitting porn, about the benefits of, not masturbating, and how difficult it is for some people because of how addictive it can be. So while I spent a long time studying the neurochemistry of pornography, while I spent a long time studying the reward pathway and how it stimulates it and how the addictive cycle forms and how it portrays and how it plays out, specifically relating to pornography and how that has later impacts on your physical health and your mental health, how that has ultimately, how that can lead to performance issues in the bed and all this sort of stuff. But the problem is that becoming aware of these things doesn't make it any better and doesn't make it go away. I need to do something with this newfound self-awareness about pornography that I always had and I always knew I wanted to fix, but just never really knew how to do it. So I guess I went back to the steps. I've been practicing the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous for the past 8 years, and I knew that there was something in there that would help me, but I just couldn't quite figure out what. And so, I went back through. Step 1, I admitted that I was powerless to pornography and that my life had become unmanageable. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, or could at least restore my relationship with myself and my sexual nature. Step 3, gave up my life and my will over to the care of God. Step 4, made a moral inventory about it. Step 5, admitted it to God, to myself, and to another human being, the exact nature of my wrongs, yada, yada, yada. You get the idea. So I would take pornography and replace the word alcohol with pornography. And I thought, maybe that'll help. Maybe that'll make sense. Now, I thought I was doing it right, and for some reason, I still just couldn't stop. I still just couldn't quit. And I'd go for long periods of time. I can go for 2 months, 3 months, and then I'd fall right back. And when I'd fall, I would fall. I would go on long binges, several weeks, several weekends spent with nothing but just watching porn. And I think the problem is that, to a great degree, I didn't really see the problem, right? I didn't see why it was so painful, why it was so damaging to me. Because you can explain all this to me on a psychological level and it will make sense, and I will agree with you that it's bad. Or at least I'll agree with you that it's not healthy. But what impact does that have on me personally? Right? I think more often than not, when we see these facts, when we see the science in a vacuum, it's very, very easy to become quickly detached. Even when we look at it from a different philosophical or religious point of view, right? And I'll use religion for example here. Because, I believe that pornography as a whole is a topic that's very, very poorly discussed in many religious circles. I remember the amount of times in which I would come into my church feeling very, very down and feeling very ashamed of pornography. And instead of finding solutions that would actually help me or that would, that would build me up and teach me to go against these habits, it was very much just continued shame and continued guilt about the things that I was already doing. So I want to make this also very, very clear. I am not at all going to intend this video to be adding to that shame, adding to that pile of guilt to anybody who already feels it. Because chances are, if you're watching this video, you likely already feel a great degree of shame and guilt about watching pornography or about your consumption of pornography. And I also don't intend to tell anyone what to do or what not to do. That isn't my place. That isn't my role. What I do know is that ultimately this is a habit and this is a practice that has not benefited me in my life. And if you find that it's not benefiting you in yours, well, perhaps there's a change that needs to be made. One of the things that I've always found very interesting is the comparison between pornography and all other types of drug addiction, right? Because it just didn't quite make sense to me. And I remember a lot of people telling me this throughout the years, being like, well, you can't feign ignorance. Pornography is nowhere near as bad as other drugs, as hardcore drugs. And look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that pornography is just as bad as other drugs because it likely isn't, right? It likely isn't. And while the addictive cycle can look very, very similar, I understand that there is a great degree to which these drugs can have a very severe impact on your neurochemistry and your reward pathway in a great degree to which porn will not even touch. It's unfair for me to compare pornography, which is just a response to a stimuli, to drugs, which is directly altering your neurochemistry. But one thing is clear, that looking at it this way was never very helpful. And to get it to the root of why, I really needed to go back to step 1 of the 12 steps. I admitted that I was powerless to pornography, and then my life had become unmanageable. But like I said, we become so often detached from these things. We become so often detached from the religious viewpoint, from the philosophical viewpoint, from the psychological viewpoint. We hear about all these negative things, about all the ways in which they affect us poorly. But I often think to myself, like, that can't apply to me, right? And so very often when I'd come back from church being more filled with shame, more filled with guilt, I would just ask myself, like, why am I such a bad person? And of course I'd get that post-nut clarity every time, like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with porn? Why can't I stop? And why don't I want to stop? And I think that was the biggest problem, right? Is that I just didn't want to stop. Because if I looked at pornography as an addiction that I needed to overcome, it wasn't going to work that way. And it wasn't working for me. Because it just didn't, it felt like more than an addiction. It felt like just a part of my life. One that I wasn't willing to part with. So now if you're going to go ahead and tell me that, oh, well, you have to stop because of all these things, well, now I don't want to. Because the benefits, the positives, far outweigh the negatives for me. So I need to stop, look at what are the positives, what are the benefits that I am getting from this? And in what way are those false? Or in what way could I substitute those? What I started to realize is that the positives which I always gained from porn came from long before I even understood what addiction was like or what pleasure was like. I can give you a very descriptive definition or a very descriptive recounting of when I started watching porn, because I started watching it before I could ever remember. One thing I do remember is that I would often, when I was a little kid, I would share a bedroom with my parents. So my parents would sleep on one side of the room and I would sleep on the bunk beds, right? And so I was in the top bunk, my sister was in the bottom bunk, and my parents' bed was directly next to mine. Well, directly next to my bunk bed. And very late at night, I remember that I would hear the TV turn on and I would see the blue light from the edge of my eyes. And so often I would crawl to the edge of my bed and just post up, my little elbows, my hands under my chin, and I'd just watch. And I don't know what I was watching, but what I was watching was porn. I can very vividly remember that now. But like I said, I was so young when that happened, and I know that was not my first time watching. So I don't remember when it was. But regardless, I always use that as an excuse, saying, well, because I was exposed to it at such an early age, and of course it had to become a part of my life. But after a certain point, I started realizing that it wasn't so much the pleasure I was after, but something deeper. I realized that when I brought it into a religious point of view, and people would tell me about how God is so much more fulfilling than porn, I need to pour into God, and God would pour into me, and I need to stop giving life to all these things that were distracting me from God. I realized that a better description of that was in regards to building up idols, right? I had made pornography an idol, and more than that, I had made pornography my God. Because when I found myself describing porn, I'd find myself saying that pornography was something that never let me down, would always cheer me up every time I needed it, and was always there for me. And it just made me feel very accepted when I didn't feel accepted anywhere else. It gave me a boost of confidence that I couldn't find anywhere else. And, I feel like in a lot of ways, people describe God in the same way, and it became immediately obvious to me. Porn has become a God to me. Porn has become an entity that is so greater than myself that I just will not let go because of how deeply attached I am to it. And so when I came to this realization, and when I came to this understanding, I realized that these benefits that I was really after were my emotional deficiencies. I realized that for the longest time I've always wanted, and still do, want a wife. I want kids. I want a family. I want someone to look into their eyes and a face to call home, right? Someone to spend time with, someone to share time with, someone to love, someone to appreciate this time with, someone to build a family with, someone to build a house with. And every time I would find myself getting rejected or find myself getting turned down by a girl, it was always a painful reminder of all the insecurities that I felt in my head. It was always a painful reminder of all these things that just made me feel like I wasn't enough and like I wasn't worth it. But wouldn't you know it, that every time I would watch porn, all those things would go away. For at least a moment, all those things would go away. Because little did I know, what I was really building was a virtual relationship. It was a virtual relationship with every porn star that would come across my screen. And so it came to the point that when I would watch it enough, I would start to remember faces, I'd start to remember names, and I ultimately built a sense of attraction to these faces and to these names. What I was really building was a parasocial relationship with all the porn stars that I was constantly watching. And it, of course, would bother me knowing that I couldn't form this relationship with anybody else. But if you're telling me that on the weekends I can escape and I can go and continue to form this virtual relationship with all my favorite porn stars, well, why wouldn't I? It takes no effort at all. Every time I'm feeling down or every time I'm feeling bad, every time I'm feeling insecure, guess what? I can open up my computer and I can type in Pornhub and I have access to all the women I have ever wanted. And this time, they're not going to reject me. This time, they're not going to turn me down. This time, they're not going to say no. And this time, I'm not going to feel like I'm not enough. I'm not going to feel like I'm not worth it. I'm not going to feel like I'm not worth the time. However, when the screen goes dark, when the video's over, and I can see myself in the reflection of my computer screen, it hits me and it dawns on me. This isn't what I want. I know this is fake. But I was in too deep at that point. So I get to the point where I look into the mirror and all I start seeing is all these insecurities, all the ways in which I am never enough, and I start comparing myself to all the porn stars I've watched, and all the sexual partners that they have on screen, and I see, my dick is nowhere near big enough, my thighs, my legs are nowhere near big enough, my calves are way too small, I'm not ripped enough, I'm not shredded enough, I'm not attractive enough, and all these ways in which I just could not measure up. But what I wasn't seeing and what I wasn't registering was the fact that really none of that mattered to me. What mattered is just that I could have somebody to be with, to spend time with. What really mattered to me is that I just have somebody. But it always dawned on me. But I think after middle school and leading into high school, I started understanding, I'm not an ugly guy. And that made me feel even worse. Because now I thought to myself, if it's not my physical appearance, then what is it? What is it about me that is so bad and so repulsive that I can't find or form a relationship? And I know I'm far from the only person that feels this way, but it felt like that at the time. I felt like I was all alone in this huge world that, despite how many billions of people there were, I would never find somebody. And that's a very dangerous place to put myself in. It was it was a great deal of victimization to rid myself of the responsibility of what I was doing. But the fact of the matter was, I chose this for myself. I chose to continue to watch porn to avoid all of the ways in which I was coming short, all the ways in which I failed to love myself. So, why do I say that I am breaking up with porn? It's very simple. For the longest time, I've been in this parasocial, one-sided relationship with pornography and with all the porn actresses that came across my screen. And I realized what a toxic relationship it was. If I wanted a relationship to be fruitful and beneficial, I needed something that would be both ways, and somewhere that would reciprocate that love and not just the attention. And I knew that I wasn't going to get that from porn, and I never would. That's why I always got that hollow and empty feeling after watching. So, as of the time of recording this video, it's now been 32 days without watching porn, and I sincerely hope that this trend will continue, and I will make it a personal goal to continue to develop myself as a person and to continue to develop these relationships that I care so deeply about. But I know that if I want to develop a relationship with a woman, I needed to let this go. I needed to cut this off, to cut off this emotional dependency, much as Bill W. talks about in The Language of the Heart. He wrote in a Grapevine article, The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety, and he would ask himself, can the 12 steps help with depression? And so it became immediately clear to me that, yes, while I might have practiced steps, why do I still feel like this? Why do I still feel this way? And I realized that I was substituting all of those previous substances and all those previous dependencies with something new and something else. And it just wasn't working. This is also not to mention all the seemingly negative ways in which this started affecting me. Once I started realizing that porn was just taking up way too much of my time. Like I said, I would spend entire weekends just watching porn and doing nothing else. And I feel really bad about it after. And I remember all those times in which my little sister would come up to me and would ask me to play with her or would ask me to take her to the park. And I'd tell her no, because I wanted to keep watching porn. Obviously, I didn't phrase it like that. I knew in the back of my head I didn't want to watch. I wanted to keep watching porn, and I valued that over spending time with her. So slowly, I started seeing every relationship in my life fail because I wanted to build up this relationship, this parasocial, one-sided, toxic relationship with pornography. So it took away my time. It took away my money, so much money down the drain, just buying whatever porn game or whatever porn video I could get my hands on. Because ultimately it just felt nicer. It felt better. It felt better to pour into this relationship that I felt I was cultivating and that was so important to me. And not only that, it was taking a huge hit on my self-esteem. It got to the point in which even in having sexual relationships with other people, I could never ejaculate. And that's still been a problem to this day. And so now I start seeing all these things that I would hear about previously, right? I remember I would dive deep into this topic and I'd hear about all these ways in which it would impact you negatively and in which it would impact your body. And I said, that can't apply to me. And here I was, seeing those very same negative effects in my life, playing out in my life. And so I would ask myself, is this really worth it to me? And especially the not being able to ejaculate part really, really scared me. I'd think to myself constantly, I need to figure this out before I ever get married. Because if I want to have kids and I can't ejaculate, this is going to be a problem. So I started to understand that this great deal of shame and this great deal of guilt, rather than allow it to bury me in levels of victimization, I needed to start to use it to escape out of this hole that I was every day constantly digging myself into. So it came time for me to make a decision. Do I want to allow all these negatives to continue to plague my life? Is it worth it to me for the benefits, for the positives that I see in pornography? And so how can I substitute that? And it became simple. The answer became very clear. How can I substitute all the benefits of watching pornography? Well, I can cultivate real relationships with real people that will really reciprocate. And that may be hard and that may take time, but would it be more fulfilling than whatever I have facing me now? I hope so. I pray that it is. Would it allow me to find a sense of fulfillment and joy that I've never felt before in my life? Well, that's what I'm chasing after. And all I know is that if I've spent the last, what is it now? If I've spent the last 17 years of my life watching pornography and not being able to find it, I don't think another 17 years is going to be enough time for me to find it in porn. It's probably a sign that I should find it somewhere else. So, for as much as I love it, and for as much as I felt it had given to me, it became clear. These benefits were false. I was building a false sense of hope, and I was building a false relationship with something that wasn't actually reciprocating. And it's time. I need to break up with porn. Because the relationship is very toxic, and it's not working. it's not giving me what I truly desire, which is a sense of love and fulfillment and joy and attention and satisfaction that is honestly way too unfair for me to place on anybody else. But even then, placing it on porn is doing me no better. And so perhaps taking this time to invest in myself and taking this time to build this idea of self-love that we hear about all the time, well, I know it's going to be a painful journey. And quite honestly, it's something that I know very little about, because while people talk about self-love all the time, what does that actually look like? I don't know. It's time to find out. And it's time to let this go. The positives don't outweigh the negatives anymore. And that's often what we refer to in Alcoholics Anonymous as hitting rock bottom. It's when the negatives and the consequences of your use far outweigh the benefits that you believe you received. So this is my rock bottom. My emotional stability has hit an all-time low. And I know that I won't feel any better by continuing to pour into this. I can't continue to give my life and my will over to the care of pornography because it doesn't have my best interest in mind. But what I do know is that there's plenty of other people out there that relate with me and want to do the same. So I will allow myself to grieve as I would with any other relationship. I will allow myself to go through the necessary healing process after breaking up with porn. And I'll find something better. I just sincerely hope that I don't become a toxic ex that's constantly looking for my ex, right? In this case, being porn. But time will tell. I know I have the right tools in mind. Well, I know I have the right tools in hand to deal with this. The only question is, am I willing to do so? And given all the ways in which it's impacted me so far, I think now, finally, I'm ready to take that step.